I sat in the dark with a loaded gun 6 feet away, and I never once reached for it, because I'd already figured out a revenge that would hurt them so much worse. For 8 years, my life was measured in rotations, 14 days of salt air and the low, rhythmic hum of the offshore oil rig, followed by 14 days of trying to reintegrate into a home that felt increasingly like a hotel I was just passing through. I worked those shifts for Alina, believing that every hour away was a brick in the foundation of our future. But the foundation was cracking, and I was the only one still laying bricks. I still remember the man I was when we started this life. 26 years old, newly certified, proud that I'd landed a position that paid enough to buy a house before either of us turned 30. Alina used to send me photos of paint swatches for rooms that didn't exist yet. She'd write "our kitchen" under a picture of white cabinets, and I'd stare at it in my bunk for an hour, grinning like an idiot. That was the man who signed up for 14 and 14. That man believed distance was a sacrifice you made together. Somewhere around year 5, the photos stopped. Not all at once, nothing about this ever happened all at once, but slowly, the way a tide pulls sand out from under your feet without you ever seeing the wave that took it. The silence I once cherished as peaceful had curdled into something suffocating. It wasn't the absence of noise, it was the absence of a connection. I would come home to a spotless house, a full fridge, a wife who kissed me at the door and asked about the weather offshore. Everything looked right. Nothing felt right. I remember the last phone call before I left for this final rotation. I tried to talk about our upcoming anniversary, 9 years. I'd already looked at flights to the coast she used to talk about visiting. She was distracted, her voice thin, half present, promising to call me back, a promise she kept less and less. I hung up and sat in the crew lounge listening to the guys around me talk about their own wives, their own kids, and I remember thinking, at least they complain. At least they have something to complain about. I didn't even have that. I had a wife who said all the right words in a voice that had gone somewhere else. I spent those first few nights on the rig staring at the ceiling of my cabin, trying to remember the cadence of her laugh from our early years. It felt like a song I used to know by heart and could no longer hum. I told myself it was fatigue. Mine, hers, the marriages. I told myself a lot of things. That rotation. Looking back, I can see now that our relationship had become a rehearsed script, performed twice a day over a bad satellite connection. How's the job? Fine. Anything new at home? Same old, same old. I know now that same old was a mask, and I was too tired, too far away, and frankly too willing to believe her to pull it off. There were signs I filed away without looking at directly: the way she'd rooted a work training 3 days into my rotation more than once. The way her phone, always face up on the counter when I was home, started living face down. The way she'd laugh at something and then go quiet, like she'd caught herself enjoying a moment she wasn't supposed to be having. There was a night, maybe 4 months before everything ended, when I called and a man's voice said something in the background, just a few words, muffled, the kind of thing you can convince yourself you misheard if you want to badly enough. I wanted to badly enough. She said it was the television. I let that be true because the alternative meant rebuilding my entire life from a satellite phone 80 miles off the coast, and I didn't have it in me that night. I told myself that if I kept providing the house, the security, the steady paycheck that let her not work if she didn't want to, the love would hold its shape and wait for me to come collect it. I was a fool who mistook stability for permanence. I know that now. I didn't know it then. Then I just knew something in my chest had gone quiet and cold, like a room with the heat shut off, and I kept walking through it anyway, hoping it would warm back up on its own. A storm rolled through the platform's operating zone in late October, cutting my rotation short by 2 full days. I remember standing on the helideck watching the crew chief wave us toward the chopper, and something in me, some old instinct I didn't examine too closely, decided not to call ahead. I wanted to surprise her. I told myself it was romance. I wanted to bring home some of the excitement we'd lost, walk in with flowers, watch her face light up the way it used to. I landed, drove the 90 minutes home in the dark, and let myself into the house through the garage a little after 2 in the morning. My boots clicked softly against the concrete floor of the mudroom, and that's when the first thing hit me: not a sound, but a smell. The house smelled wrong, not like the lavender cleaner Alina always used, but something sharper, more expensive, unfamiliar. Cologne, not mine. I stood very still in that mudroom for longer than I'd like to admit. A pair of men's shoes, polished to a mirror finish, sat by the door where my own work boots usually went. My stomach dropped in a way I can only describe as physical, like missing a stair in the dark. I moved through the hallway slowly, quietly, the same careful, methodical way I'd been trained to inspect a rig platform for structural failure, checking one detail at a time, refusing to let myself draw conclusions until I had enough evidence to trust them. A glass of wine, half finished, sat on the kitchen counter. Not Alina's brand. A woman's lipstick shade on the rim that wasn't hers either. Wrong, I realized a beat later, because it wasn't a woman's at all. It was smudged onto a second wine glass sitting beside the first. 2 glasses, 2 people. And then faint but unmistakable laughter drifting down from our bedroom upstairs, her laughter, and beneath it, a man's voice I didn't recognize. My heart didn't race. That's the part that still surprises me when I tell this story. It went cold and it went quiet, the way the ocean goes quiet right before a swell breaks. I didn't feel panic, I felt something closer to clarity. I took out my phone not to call anyone not yet and I started documenting. The shoes, the glasses, the lipstick, the sound. I built my case in silence one photo at a time, standing in my own kitchen like a stranger in someone else's crime scene. I didn't storm the stairs. I want to be honest about what happened next because I think the honesty matters more than the drama. I walked into the living room and sat down in my recliner, the one Alina always complained took up too much space, and I waited. In the dark, the house around me creaked the way old houses do. And every creak from directly above me told me exactly where in the room they were. I won't pretend I didn't think about worse things in those minutes. I thought about the gun safe in the hall closet, 6 feet from where I sat. I thought about it the way you think about a cliff edge when you're standing near one, not because you intend to jump, but because your mind insists on showing you the option. I didn't move toward it, I want that understood clearly. What I did instead was sit with my hands folded and wait, and in that waiting 43 minutes I checked my phone twice. I did something I hadn't done in years. I actually reviewed my life honestly without the excuses I'd been feeding myself on satellite calls from 300 miles offshore. I thought about every shift I'd worked, every check I'd deposited straight into our joint account, every anniversary I'd missed because the platform couldn't spare me. I thought about the paint swatches from 9 years ago, the kitchen that didn't exist yet, the version of Alina who used to write our kitchen under a photo like it was a promise. I realized, sitting in that dark living room, that I wasn't grieving a marriage anymore. The marriage had already ended. I'd simply been the last person in the house who hadn't been told. What I was actually mourning was my own blindness, 8 years of choosing the easier story over the true one because the true one would have cost me everything I thought I was building. I waited for the sounds upstairs to stop. When they finally did and I heard footsteps moving toward the stairs, I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt something colder and far more useful, resolve. When they came downstairs and the kitchen light caught their faces, I let the silence do the work I wasn't going to do with my voice. The shock on their faces was the only satisfaction I allowed myself in that moment, Alina's hand flying to her mouth. The man beside her freezing mid-step like he'd walked into a wall he hadn't seen. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything, didn't put a hand on either of them. I sat at the kitchen table in the harsh overhead light, phone propped against the sugar bowl recording, and I asked them calmly, almost politely, to explain the last year of my life to me, not the last night, the last year. It took a while for either of them to speak. When they finally did, it came out in pieces, then all at once, the way confessions tend to. I let the recording run the entire time. By the time the sun started coming up through the kitchen window, I had what I needed. A full, coherent recorded account, timestamps and all, plus a handwritten statement Alina signed at my request, her hand visibly shaking as she wrote it. I told her it was for clarity. What it actually was leverage, the kind no lawyer on her side would ever be able to talk their way around. I filed for divorce the following morning, evidence in hand before her attorney had even finished their first coffee. It changed everything about how that process went. I kept the house. I kept the accounts I'd spent 8 years off the coast building. Alina left with her clothes, a few boxes, and a reputation that didn't survive the divorce proceedings intact. Her lover, as it turned out, was married himself, a fact that came out during discovery and ended up costing him considerably more than it cost me. He left the city not long after. I never saw him again and I never asked where he went. 6 months later, I'm back on the rig. The rotations are the same, 14 and 14, but the air feels different now. It's not lonelier, if anything it's lighter. I sold the house eventually. I didn't want 9 years of paint swatches haunting a kitchen I now walked through alone. I bought something smaller, closer to the coast, Alina and I always talked about visiting and never did. I go there myself now on my off weeks and I watch the water and I don't feel like I'm waiting for anyone to call me back anymore. I learned something in that dark living room I don't think I could have learned any other way. The most effective response to betrayal isn't the one that burns bright and burns out. It's the one that stays quiet, stays patient, and leaves you standing at the end of it with your dignity intact and a clean, clear record of exactly what happened. I have my life back. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, the road ahead of me is entirely my own.